and welcome to this episode of Jesus Unmasked, where Lindsay and I go through the Bible and unmask Jesus from all of the things that we have projected on him throughout Christian history. And we've got some really great passages today, one from Genesis and one from Luke. But before we get to them, Lindsay, how's it going?
It's going well. Lots of
Good.
stuff is going on, and it's been a long time since we've been able to sit down and talk about Jesus together.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But before we do that, you have a new addition to your family.
We do.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. We have our first four-legged family member in the form of a miniature golden doodle named Koa. He is 8 weeks old. He is a beautiful, sweet little puppy. And I think getting him has helped me understand our Bible passages on another level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How's that? How's that?
Well, why don't we read the Bible passages?
Okay.
And then I can get to why it is that having a wonderful new dog has helped me understand this in a new way.
Okay, I'm interested because it's not that long ago that we had a puppy in our house, and sometimes puppies are a pain in the butt. And you gotta love them anyway. Is that where you're gonna go? We'll find out. I'm in suspense. Okay, so we've got a Genesis passage and a Luke passage. I will read the Genesis passage. It's Genesis 18 verses 1 through 10a. This is a passage where Abraham is met by three strangers, and they end up having this conversation. And then you're gonna read the passage from Luke, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to read these together to kind of compare and contrast them. So we'll just read them all, both.
Sounds good. Here is Genesis. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw three men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sara and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sara?" And he said, "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sara shall have a son."
Okay.
That's the end of that passage. So,
all right. So yes, let's just move on straight to Luke, and then we can talk about both of them together. So this is Luke 10, 38 through 42, a very short passage. So, now as Jesus and his disciples, went on their way, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to come help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. One thing is needful. Mary has chosen the good portion, which shall not be taken away from her." Right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
So should we talk about similarities and differences in these passages?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we should.
Awesome.
And because I think this is it's a very short passage. So, but yeah, so in Genesis and in Luke, the Lord comes among devoted followers. And so both passages talk about hospitality, and both passages talk about listening, and both passages talk about love, and both passages talk about receiving God in your presence. But there are some very striking differences. So, I think what first strikes me about the gospel passage is Martha and how busy she is and how much work she is trying to do. It may or may not be because Jesus is visiting her. It may be all the tasks of the day just to get through the day and survive. It may be extra. There may be more on top of that to try to get the house in order to receive a guest, and not just any guest, a guest that she recognizes as the Lord. She calls him Lord, and I know that that can be a title that can just be a title of respect, but I think there's more to it in this case. I think she really recognizes him as maybe not in the fullness of his divinity, but I think she recognizes him for the important and, good man, good leader that he is, and, wants to give him hospitality, wants to give him, her expression of love. And so she's trying to work hard for him. And she gets exasperated when her sister just sits down and starts listening. And she says, "Don't you care, Lord?" And Jesus basically says, "Nope." And so, that really strikes me as, I have my initial reaction to it, and then I have my more reflective reaction to it. But I want to hear what you think first, Adam.
Well, my initial reaction to it is, why is Jesus being a jerk to Martha? Like, hey, thanks, Martha. I appreciate you working and trying to show hospitality, which is what I've been trying to get my disciples to recognize throughout the last 3 or 4 chapters. Martha is like fulfilling it. I mean, Martha cannot call Grubhub and say, "Hey, I've got like 20 people over and can you bring me some food?" Right? She or somebody has to prepare this stuff. And that is an essential aspect of hospitality. I mean, it's quite often the women in the Gospels, especially in the Gospel of Luke, who get it. Like, the women get it more than the men do. The men are like shown as bubbling idiots who are just fighting over power and prestige. And here's Martha, who's seemingly fulfilling this act of hospitality. It doesn't say that Martha's making food for everybody who's come, but that's kind of like what I get from it. Maybe I'm projecting that onto it. As you say, she might just be like doing the routine stuff of the day, but even that has to be done. So,
yes. I mean,
right?
That's my point, that the routine stuff of the day is enough to take up all the time of the day without the added stress, because it is stressful. And it can be a joyful stress to prepare for a guest. But there is work that goes into it. There are things that need to be done. And Jesus sounds very dismissive of that in this passage. And so that really strikes me as, that's the first thing that stands out to me. But so I think that reaction, that initial reaction to think Jesus is being unfair, I think that's important because it's not the whole story, but I think it's important to recognize that as the story. So if you feel empathy for Martha, I think it's important to go with that feeling, because Martha is showing love, showing hospitality by preparing for her guest, and also just by doing what needs to be done for survival, you know? Anyway, you look like you have something to say, but
Well, she's showing hospitality towards her guest, but she's also like, when there can be a sense of like resentment that builds up when we emphasize hospitality. Like, and I think that's what Martha's experiencing here, which is totally understandable. But we can get caught up in this idea of, hey, I'm doing this hospitality thing right. And that person over there is just sitting and not doing it right. And I'm so much better than this person. This is the whole mimetic theory aspect, where we start comparing ourselves over and against others, when we start comparing our own goodness against others. And I think Martha might be falling into that trap here when she says that she's distracted by many tasks, and the Lord said, well, she says, my sister Mary is just like sitting there listening to you and not helping me with these important tasks. And Jesus says, well, there's like one thing, like you're distracted from the one thing. And how many things are there in our lives that distract us from the one thing, which I guess Jesus doesn't say it in this passage, what that one thing is. But just before this, we have the story of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus says the one thing, which is really two things, is to love God and to love your neighbor. Your neighbor includes your siblings, your sister, your brothers, who are often the hardest people to love, right? Like these strangers who come in, you're willing to go like an extra mile for them because they're new. You don't really know them all that well. You have this Jesus guy who has some prestige and he's coming into your house. I'm going to go the extra mile to help this guy out. But like your sister, who you're like, you've had this history and some of it's not all good. And so your resentment can build up against your siblings, as the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible shows so much. That's where much of our resentment goes, is to the people who we're closest with. So Mary is distracted from the one thing, which is to love your neighbor, who includes your sister.
Yeah, Martha.
Right? Yes, Martha. Yes.
Yes, I think that. I think that's definitely true. I also think, I wonder about the evangelist's translation of this message, because I think the way that it's set up here has Jesus not diluting the rivalry, but kind of setting up room for more rivalry. I realize that he's defending Mary, but I think a very simple "thank you, Martha, I appreciate you, Martha," would probably go so far into easing her concerns. I know the NRSV says distracted, but I read the RSV because that was the first Bible I grabbed.
Okay.
And in the RSV, it says anxious and troubled. And I think that you can get a lot more empathy for Martha from those words, anxious and troubled, because there is a lot that goes into preparing for a guest. And the thing is, I think that Martha is doing a lot to show love, but I also think that she is probably not feeling love, not feeling respect, not feeling like she is, like her efforts are being recognized and taken seriously. And I think what Jesus is trying to tell her is that you don't have to struggle so hard, because what we're all aiming for is love. And Mary's coming over here to receive love, and you can do that too. You can walk away from all these tasks. I won't think any less of you. All I want to do is share love with you. And I want you to feel so comfortable in my presence that you don't feel like you have to impress me, that you can come relax in the presence of love. And that there is an urgency to relax into the presence of love that is just as urgent as all the tasks that we do to show love. I think the one thing that ties it all together is love and making sure that people feel it. And I think the wording of this passage, that's what I think the message is. But I don't think the passage is worded in a way that conveys that very clearly, because I do feel like this passage might be setting up more mimetic rivalry. And I feel like a few words to appreciate Martha would have gone a long way before saying Mary is doing the right thing, And I wonder if that is somewhere in the translation that didn't get the fullness of Jesus's message. That's what I hope.
Well, I mean, you do get hints of it in verse 42. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. So the better part, there are multiple parts to the one thing.
Right.
And Martha may have been fulfilling a part of it. Mary at this moment has just chosen a better part.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well,
so
right.
he's not like saying, how dare you do all this hospitality stuff.
No,
right?
no, he's not. No, he's not saying that.
It could be, you know what? It could be talking about siblings. It could be the difference between Cain and Abel, right?
Mm-hmm.
When Cain, they both make a sacrifice to God, and it was Cain's disposition. It was his mood about the sacrifice, which was done in rivalry with his brother in order to try to achieve the pleasure of God, or in order to try to achieve God's love for him. And you don't have to do that, right? As you've been saying, you can just relax into God's love and trust that it's there for you.
Right. So I think that
we do have a few people watching, a few viewers, and if you have comments or questions, you can put those in the chat room. Lindsay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. Hello to our viewers. So the reason I wanted to read Genesis first was just to show that all the work, because Genesis actually shows the work that goes into preparing for guests that we don't see in the gospel. But when Abraham sees visitors are coming, he runs and he doesn't do the work himself, but he has his servants do a lot of work. And he tells his wife, here, make 3 cakes from scratch. And he basically tells his servant, here, turn this calf into a steak. And you've got to realize that without any modern conveniences, that takes a lot of work. And all the work that goes into things that help us relax is often overlooked, taken for granted. And so I wanted to do that to show, to kind of build up Martha here. But the thing is, I do think that Martha feels kind of resentful, which is understandable. And I think that, like you said about Cain and Abel, when we're working hard to prepare for something, that is a form of love, but it's also it also kind of feeds into our ego, and it also feeds into a sense that we have to work hard and even compete for things like love. That we can't just relax into love. And so I think that a story that emphasizes that you don't need to work hard for love, that you can just come and be in the presence of love, that love comes to you and you can just relax in it. I think that is a message that can be taken from all of this. And I think it's interesting that in Genesis, the only thing we hear from the Lord, from the visitors to Abraham, is, where is your wife? So, the first thing that we hear them say is, where is the person that we can't see? Where is the one who's not here, who's not being seen, who's not being heard? And, going to her,
Yeah, no, that's a crucial part of it. Cynthia says, I remember acting out this Mary Martha story when I was about 7 years old. I was Martha, of course, and I'm still working out Martha's role. That's awesome. Yes, and
well,
thank you, Cynthia.
Yes,
go ahead.
Cynthia is my mother. And
Mm-hmm.
and so she is the one who did all the work in the home that made our home a hospitable place. And I did not see all of it or appreciate all of it. And now I am the one responsible for doing it. Now, I'm not the only one. I share household tasks. We have a very egalitarian home. But now that I know the work that goes into making a home hospitable, I can understand Martha's point a little more. So I think the one thing that Jesus is talking about is prioritizing love and recognizing love and giving love, and also receiving love, also recognizing that you are loved. Because if Martha had recognized herself as loved, maybe she could have relaxed a little more. And if that is where Jesus is trying to guide her, then I hope he did a little more than the evangelist said he did, honestly, because I feel like the words of Scripture set us as readers up to compare them as well. So that...
Well, I think that the way to move beyond that is what Cynthia is saying, is identifying with the characters in these stories. And where do you find yourself as Martha? Where do you find yourself as Mary? In this context, finding yourself as Mary is a radical thing. Mary is the one who sits at the feet of Jesus, right? And in first century, anywhere, not just first century Judaism, to have a woman sit at the feet of a rabbi is a pretty radical thing. And it shows that Mary considered herself, and Jesus considered her, a disciple. And so this is one of the amazing things that Luke does, is elevates women as having an important role in salvation history. And Luke doesn't just get this on his own. He doesn't just get this by being there's an important danger that we need to point out in this text, and that is interpreting it in an anti-Semitic or anti-Judaic way, where Jesus is the good guy elevating women and Judaism is bad because it lowers women, right? You have to avoid that. And the Genesis text does that beautifully, because Jesus gets this elevation of women from within his own Jewish tradition.
Right.
How does Judaism enter into the world? Through Abraham and his wife Sarah, right?
Exactly.
Without Sarah, there is no Israel.
Exactly.
Without Sarah, none of this happens, and that's why, as you brilliantly pointed out, the strangers come to Abraham and say, "Where is your wife Sarah?"
Right.
And unfortunately, that's where the reading cuts off in the lectionary. But as you go through it, the angels say, "I'm going to come back to you, and Sarah will have children or a child," right? And Sarah laughs because how can this happen when Sarah is 99 years old? Well, the previous chapter, before we start scapegoating Sarah for laughing at God, the previous chapter, in chapter 17, Abraham laughs at God for the exact same reasons. How can this happen? So both genders end up laughing at God in disbelief. Abraham and Sarah are often presented as the models of faith, the models of belief, because they're the ones who listen to God, but they are also the models of disbelief. It's
Yeah.
okay to laugh at God. Interestingly, when Sarah laughs at God, God doesn't say, "Oh, you're going to hell," and "How dare you ever laugh at me?" Uh,
Hmm.
strangers do get a little like it's almost like they get sad,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
right?
what's interesting is also, you go through, and by the time you get to the Gospels, there is another old woman
Yeah,
who has who conceives a son, and it's a man who disbelieves that it can happen, and God says, "Okay, I'm going to shut you up until you
right.
see that this is real." And so,
Yeah,
so when so when Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, gets pregnant, and John is Zechariah, John the Baptist's father, says, "This isn't going to work. You know, she's
right,
too old." He gets shut up.
right.
So there's a lot of subversion of patriarchy that happens. So, the Lord goes to Abraham, but all we hear him say is, "Where is your wife?" And he delivers the message to both of them, not just to Abraham. And then by the time we get to the gospel, the servant, the person who's taken on the role of the servant is Martha. She's the one who's taken on the role of serving. And I love that my translation says serving, because it said you're distracted by your serving. And I love that it says that it emphasizes that that's what she's doing. And it seemed to me that Jesus was a little dismissive of her, but it could also be read as Jesus inviting her to come and sit at his feet as a disciple, which, as you say, is an honor that Mary feels comfortable enough in taking. But also, it does give Martha a voice. She speaks. Martha Speaks is the name of a show about a dog, which brings me back to my dog, which I'll talk more about later. But anyway, Martha speaks, and that is a step up. And it's not a step up as in better. It's a step up as in this is a progression that has gone throughout the Bible, and a foundation has been laid for this. And women are coming and getting a voice now. And it's a progression in the storytelling. It's not necessarily this is better than that. And I think that's kind of the whole point of this, of the way we're trying to read this. Not that it's not about one being better than the other. It's not about Mary being better than Martha. It's not about the rivalry. It's about relaxing into love and realizing that we don't need rivalry. We don't need competition. And we do need to work to survive in this world, but we don't need to work for the thing that we need most, which is recognizing we are loved, because that comes free. That is a gift. And recognizing that we don't need that kind of competition, I think that's the one thing Jesus is talking about. Like you can relax into the presence of love. You don't need to do things to earn it, because that feeds your ego, and that feeds a sense of who you are over and against others. And you need to just relax into the presence of love. Am I making sense? Because when I keep talking, I can go on into different.
No, that makes sense. And I
Yeah.
think when you relax into the presence of love, it better opens us up to loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, which is the whole
Yeah.
point of what Jesus is getting at. And you see that my last point on all of this would be that when the Lord appears to Abraham, the Lord appears as three men. Abraham has never met these three men before. They're strangers to Abraham. They're traveling through the land. They're immigrants, right? And what does Abraham do? He does not live in fear of the strangers in his midst, right? He shows them hospitality. Because Abraham has some amount of trust. in God, in this presence of love or whatever that's bigger than himself, he's able to show hospitality and love to these strangers in his midst and trust that it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right. So this has clear implications for, over and over again, the Bible says, love the stranger in your midst, love the foreigner in your midst, treat the foreigner, love the foreigner as if the foreigner was one of your own people, Leviticus says. So this is just an example of how to live that out in our world back then and today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to say something about that because, I was trying to think of a way to relate this to things going on in our world today. And one of the biggest things that's taking up the news cycle, because it should, is the crisis of morality on our border. And I was thinking this passage doesn't seem to go with that, but it does, because this passage is all about prioritizing love. That's what it's all about. It's all about recognizing that love is the most important thing. And right now, the people who are coming to our border seeking refuge, seeking asylum, they cannot relax into the presence of love. I mean, they've been running for their lives, literally. And instead of letting them relax into the presence of love, they're being met with cruelty and dehumanization and more danger. So,
well, they may have relaxed into the presence of love because they're saying that they deserve more than this, more than what they're getting.
Right.
And so they're working for it.
They've felt it in their hearts, but we are not, our nation is not welcoming them into the presence of love.
Which shows, I think, that we have not relaxed into the presence of love because we are living in fear of the other.
Exactly.
And that's what Abraham is modeling for us, is how to relax into the presence of love and love the stranger, the immigrant in our midst.
Right. And this follows right on the heels of the story of the Good Samaritan.
Yep.
And so, and that, of course, is all about, it's about showing hospitality to the stranger. It's also about the stranger showing hospitality and seeing the love within someone who we wouldn't necessarily recognize that love in. And there is an urgency to recognizing love in your presence. In both stories, that really connects them. I mean, and so
another thing that we can welcome into our homes are animals and pets. So how does this relate to your puppy?
Well, so I said that this whole passage makes me think of my puppy, and it's that yes, I have work to do, and I have no less work to do now that I have a puppy. But sometimes I have to put some of the less urgent work aside, work that must be done, but maybe not right now, just in order, of course, to clean up the puppy's messes and to stop the puppy from chewing on the things he shouldn't chew. Those seem like very urgent tasks, but also just loving him and playing with him. I have to remember that that's just as urgent, because what I'm doing is welcoming a new member to the family and trying to make him feel loved. And I can't do that just with language. He's a whole nother animal, and I have to figure out the ways that will communicate love to him in ways that he understands. So that's a lot of work, but it's good work. And it's work that that feels like it's taking me away from real work just to sit and pet a puppy or throw a ball for a puppy. It doesn't feel like real work, just like sitting at Jesus's feet might not feel like real work. And it shouldn't feel like work. Work seems like the wrong word here. But that is what is most urgently needed, is just being in the presence of love, recognizing love, and I'm preparing myself for the unconditional love that a dog will give. I have to show it first, because if I don't show it first, then I'm not conditioning love in my animal. I'm conditioning fear or apathy or something if I don't take the time to build love. So, that's how this helped me. That's how my dog and reading this passage made, those were where my thoughts went, basically.
Well, I would nuance that a little bit, because I've got a dog, and I have not always shown love to my dog. I haven't done anything mean to my dog, but sometimes I ignore my dog because life, right?
Oh, of course.
And the dog always responds with faithful love, and no matter how I treat it. But it relates to the Genesis passage, because God is kind of like a dog in that our faith doesn't, or lack of faith doesn't matter. Abraham and Sarah laugh at God, and God still is faithful to Abraham and Sarah. Right? And that's
absolutely.
That's how my dog is to me.
It's not like I'm trying to. It's not like I'm trying to earn my dog's love. It's not that. It's. I know that that's what they say about dogs, that it's unconditional love and stuff. But I do have to put some effort into making my dog feel loved, because I know that it's unconditional, but at the same time, there are steps I can take to make my dog feel like a member of the family, which will come back to me. And if I ignore those steps, then I don't know if I'm creating, if I'm really creating that sense of family in the dog. But of course you can't do it all the time. Of course life has to take, of course you have other tasks. Of course you have to ignore the dog sometimes. But there are times when you do have to just put everything aside and just do love. Basically, put everything else aside and just love. That's Yep. Dogs
Absolutely.
And children remind us of that. So.
Dogs and children and immigrants. Yes,
and immigrants.
Absolutely. Yeah. So awesome. Thank you everyone for watching this episode of Jesus Unmasked. We will do it all again next Wednesday at 10:30 Central, 8:30 Pacific. Lindsay, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you everybody for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Adam.
Awesome. Until next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Grace and peace be with you. Bye-bye.
Grace and peace. Goodbye.